RTOC Region 9 Solid Waste Workgroup breakout session.
So good to see everybody.
We're still a couple minutes early, so I think we'll just go ahead and give it at least a couple minutes till we get to a full 2:35, or we'll see how, hi Debbie, we'll see how it all works. We'll kind of watch everybody coming in, and when it slows down a little bit, or is, I don't want to get it going too late. I want to try to get going on time if possible.
Yeah, we'll get going at 2:35, I think.
All right, it's about a minute and a half, folks.
If people want to put their name and tribal affiliation in the chat box, that would be great. That way we can make sure to credit your participation for your training record.
And people already are.
Good. I like seeing everybody's name pop up. Makes it seem like it's really happening.
50 participants, 51, 52.
Wow. This room is getting crowded.
I know on one of the recent sessions I was on, somebody was commenting, my goodness, there's 100 people in the session, and when we're here in person, we can only fit 30, 35 in the room. So
that's right.
That's one of the benefits to an online platform.
Yes, we have enough chairs.
Yeah, we do. We don't have to go out and get more. 55 people in the room, 234, folks, just another minute or so.
Hey, Rob, this is Rosanna.
Yo.
I can't sign in because I'm just on my phone.
Hi, Rosanna. I see it says
Hi.
Rosanna's iPhone.
Yeah.
Rosanna, can you give me your last name and
Marrujo, M-A-R-R-U-J-O, Owens Valley Indian Water Commission.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Rosanna, I just signed in for you in the chat room too, so we've got you captured there.
Excellent.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
That's great.
I'm remembering the last time that I was in your offices, picturing you both walking around, seeing your nice plotter that you had there, and remember being in your office.
Well, it looks like it's 2:35 already.
We're live. Yay.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the RTOC Solid Waste Workgroup. And I'm Deirdre Nurre, in case we haven't met. My colleague, partner in crime, Rob Roy. And Jenny, you want to say hello?
Hi, y'all. I'm here as moderator, so if y'all need any help, just let me know.
So
Thanks,
Jenny, you're going to help us kind of keep an eye on the chat box and see if we overlook any questions or comments or anything, and thank you for that. And Deirdre, are we going to, I forgot to ask you earlier, are we just going to do this kind of like normal? This is like a regular meeting. We're not holding questions to the end or anything like that, right? We want participation. We want people to feel free to jump in and share, right?
Absolutely. So we'll ask Jenny to go ahead and just pipe up, interrupt with your questions. There's no need to hold questions to the end because this is really a discussion opportunity. And I just feel bad that we don't have those wonderful annual conference refreshments that were always in the hallway for us. The pretzels with the cheese, we need those. We'll survive without them. And so do ask your questions. Jenny will remind us of those. And momentarily we'll have our agenda up on the screen. It didn't arrive yet, so we're just waiting for that to show up. But just to do a quick review of what to expect, we'll start off with sort of a crowdsourcing / announcement section where we'll give you some announcements, and we'd like to hear from you if you have any announcements or if you have anything that's front and center for you that you want to tell us about in this announcements crowdsourcing phase. And then we're going to be talking about COVID and solid waste and hearing from you about what your experiences have been. I'll just give you a couple blurbs from the national perspective on what big picture has been noted. And then if we could hear from you all, here we go. Here's our agenda if you can see it.
And that's me running a Deirdre.
Oh,
So
thank you so
I'm running
much,
it.
Rob. I appreciate that.
Mhm.
Yeah, so we'll talk about solid waste under COVID. We're going to talk a little bit then about creating standard operating procedures for solid waste programs. Could that be a useful thing for your program? Do you have standard operating procedures? Let's hear more about that. And at the end, we're going to have a session on solid waste and GAP. We may not have time to get really in depth into that topic, but we do have some slides to share. We have Nico Anderson from our GAP program who will be available to answer questions on solid waste and GAP. So
Deirdre, I'm going to jump in real quick there.
do jump in.
Next thing by saying, when I'm sharing, I won't be able to take down notes or see the chat box and things. So Jenny will be keeping on relying on you for chat box issues. And like I said, I can't really take notes while we're doing this, but I'll keep running things. And just one quick thing I wanted to mention to everybody, when we're talking about standard operating procedures, I've realized that sometimes different people view this differently. Deirdre and I were having a couple of conversations about this, and she was thinking of like a standard operating procedure being a big thing that encompasses all of your operations. Whereas when I was referring to SOPs, I think of them as unique individual pieces that kind of like pieces of a puzzle. So I just want to throw that out to you all. And so that as we start, if we get to that and we talk about SOPs, maybe you can be thinking about whether you think like one big document that covers every aspect of your operation is better versus individual documents that tell people how to do a particular task, like how to operate your baler, let's say. All right, thank you, John. Deirdre, please continue.
Yeah, good point, Rob. Let's be thinking about that. So now's your chance to sort of give us your announcements, give us what's up with you. Do you have a big issue that's a burning issue that you want to talk about? From EPA's point of view, our announcements, we'll wait for you to pop in with your announcements in the chat box, but we just wanted to make you aware of a couple of training opportunities. First of all, some of you took part in our Developing Small-Scale Transfer Stations on Tribal Lands course that was held over the summer. This course actually emerged indirectly from this work group, and it became a national training, and it emerged from the work group because of the concerns people had about, gee, what is a transfer station? I think I want one, but I need to know more about it. And that sort of morphed into this course that we have a professional trainer, that working for us to do this training. It's going to happen one more time on Thursdays in November and December. We'd love to have you sign up. You can contact me. I also sent out an email to the Solid Waste Workgroup. I think an email went out to, oh look, Jenny's posting it up. Thank you, Jenny. Here's the link to register for that Developing Tribal Transfer Stations course. If you want to go back one more slide, there you go. So unlike the last course we taught, this is going to be sort of session by session. So you don't have to sign up for the whole course. I mean, you sign up for the whole course, but you don't have to take the whole course. You can take what session seems to apply to you. If you have a transfer station, maybe you're only interested in kind of operational challenges. Or if you don't have one, maybe you want to know what is a transfer station, what might it cost, how to size it. And so you might want to go to one of the earlier sessions, but you can go to all of them. So it went really well the first time around, so we're offering again by popular demand, and we'd love to have you take part. So that's it for that announcement. And then the next slide, we're talking about community-based social marketing for tribal environmental professionals. Perhaps some of you took part in the CBSM orientation that was held just a few days ago to introduce folks to this way of helping to change behavior by creating motivation and removing barriers. It's a really interesting situations in which this has helped tribes at Paula and at some tribes in the Midwest. There's others that I'm probably blanking out on, but there'll be two sort of in-depth workshop sessions for you to really stretch and workshop your idea. And that's happening in November. You'll see the dates up there on the screen there, November 3rd and 10th. And maybe we can post that registration link in the chat box too. There we go. Thank you so much, Jenny. What about other folks, other announcements or things you want to share with the work group?
And if anybody attended the Tribal Lands and Environment Forum, think of this as a birds of a feather session. Please go ahead and unmute yourselves and jump in and join us. I'm going to ask a real quick question. Deirdre, the CBSM training, the Tribal Infrastructure Task Force had 3 teams that worked on different projects, and Team 2 was tasked specifically with developing community-based social marketing tools to help tribes do outreach. Is this training that's hosted by EPA based on the work of that team from the ITF?
I don't think so, Rob. I mean, CBSM is a useful tool that is kind of emerging throughout different parts of the country. But certainly I think a lot of people realize that it has lots of potential helpful overlap with solid waste programs and in fact any tribal environmental programs. So yeah, it's kind of out there in the universe right now.
Cool.
Any more announcements from anybody? Okay, well, feel free to make your needs known, share your opinions as we move forward. It is okay to unmute yourself if you see fit. So we're going to talk a little bit now just to hear your reflections about solid waste under COVID-19. You know, this work group has met a few times since we all went into quarantine or various stages of quarantine in March. And we've had this discussion item in our work group at previous sessions, but it's just such an important topic for us to be sharing, and it's such a fast moving phenomenon that we felt it was important to have another opportunity for people just to share what they're experiencing with, you know, COVID-19 and solid waste on tribal lands. I'm going to just lead this off with just a few kind of notes on some national trends that have been observed. You know, it's really hard to do any sort of statistically valid survey of what's actually going on with waste, but you can learn something by surveying haulers. And in a national survey of haulers that was done by SWANA in the spring, it was found that in US cities averaged 25% increase in residential solid waste. So solid waste, municipal solid waste from residents was up 25%. And it was up even higher in some other major cities, like Chicago noticed an increase of 50% in residential waste. Commodity prices were shifting all around in the spring. Some prices were up for certain materials like recycled paper and cardboard, but went way down for plastic. The markets for plastics are really crashed. And then there was a finding, you know, an observation of a real mix of materials that had been shifting towards single-use plastics in waste, which is hardly surprising given people are using single service to do takeout from restaurants or, you know, Trader Joe's or what have you. Some municipalities have had to stop their recycling programs. There's been a huge decrease in the commercial waste stream, just as there's been an increase in the residential waste stream. So, you know, it's been real tough on recyclers, real tough on the scrap markets, and hard on the people who actually are delivering the service, people who are actually out there on the front lines. You know, when some cities have tried to minimize exposure to solid waste workers by having them shift to an earlier shift in the morning. But some residents are not pleased with that because it causes a large buildup of people who miss that pickup. And then it ends up being, you know, large piles of material left on the street. So, you know, it's just been really tough for everyone, but we got to really think first and foremost about our frontline workers and keeping them safe. What are you noticing? What are folks noticing? Are you guys seeing a big increase in residential solid waste? Is it kind of same old, same old? What are you guys seeing?
Deirdre, there's a question in the chat. how are we addressing the reduction of drop-off centers in California?
I don't know the answer to that question, actually. I don't know.
Hey,
This
Deirdre,
is Rob. I actually did. Go ahead, Mervyn, please.
I mean, our operation here, I mean, we have curbside pickup, you know, we're running business as usual. Certainly, you know, the driver, you know, does not get out of the truck, you know, anything that's outside of the waste container, you know, is left. And so, you know, what we try to tell our residents is, you know, just, you know, leave everything in the can, and, you know, we're going to come by and pick it up. And as far as some of the off reservation customers that go to our southern facility, seems to be the same. I mean, our workers are, you know, doing everything they can to stay safe. And I don't know what's happening on the ground, on site, you know, when people come in to dump or drop off their waste. And, but I had a question. You were talking, Deirdre, about recycling, and, you know, with respect to plastics, I think during the last Solid Waste Workgroup meeting, we talked a little bit about how, you know, plastic, you know, the plastic industry cannot make as much money off of recycled plastic versus making new plastic. And so, you know, from the standpoint of what, you know, we need to do to reduce waste, because I think for the most part, when there is no market, even for aluminum, it costs more to recycle than it is to, you know, get any return that's amenable to a program, you know. And so when you look at recycling, you know, on a large scale, what is being done, you know, for those industrial companies that produce aluminum in plastic, metal, you know, all metals, glass, what's being done, you know, to try to come to grips with the waste and the amount of waste that's piling up.
Mervyn, are you talking about what is happening, if anything, regarding sort of incentivizing businesses, like creating business incentives for them to prop up their ability to recycle materials? Or are you looking more at like, what are we doing to sort of regulate or force them to do?
No, not necessarily forcing them to do anything, but it's like, you know, when you look at the market and you see what's happening to the rainforest and, you know, in the Amazon, and you look at the possibility of reusing wood products, it's not being done. You know, the term recycling is used by those of us that are familiar with it, but when it comes to the mainstream market, corporate interests, they probably don't know what recycling means. And, you know, I don't know what happens to the physical properties of plastic when you recycle and process it for reuse in other products. And I guess that would go for, you know, glass, rubber, all the recyclables.
Yeah, Mervyn, that's one of the challenges that I see being faced is that, yes, plastic does degrade every time that it's recycled and reformed into new products. It does tend to degrade. Some plastics do that more than others. I remember seeing the ads a while back showing like a bus bench and it was saying, you know, I used to be a, you know, a drinking water bottle or something like that, because that's what oftentimes happens, is that these products, because the plastic does break down a little bit upon recycling and reforming, they're put into products like that. You know, like you're saying, well, what is going on in the country? And you kind of talked about corporate interests and things. You know, my thought and my opinion about a lot of this is that with a market-based economy, it's the people that drive that are the consumers. And if we as consumers continue to really push the corporations out there to you know, I'm sorry, I'm not getting it out quite right, but you know, to do a better job with these types of things, to make things more reusable, more truly recyclable. And you know, one of the things that I saw recently, Coca-Cola is looking to reduce some of the, you know, the 6-pack rings that go on top of the packaging. They're looking to replace those with a fiberboard type one. Mervyn, you were mentioning, you know, like wood and how it can be reused. One of the problems that happens so often is that when they make things out of wood fibers, they also add in plastics to them to make them a little bit more durable or more able to handle, you know, getting wet. And then that makes those fibers not recyclable. Now they are using a renewable resource in wood, and so there definitely is some benefit to that. But it's unfortunate that sometimes the packaging, different types of materials all go together and make it really challenging to recycle. I have been seeing some really interesting things going on by, you know, nonprofit organizations, academia, and just people that seem to have a passion for this, where they're really trying to come up with new materials. I remember several years ago seeing the guy who was working on, basically it was using like mushrooms, basically fungi, to make, instead of, you know, the little pellets that we get put in our boxes when we're buying things from Amazon or whatever, he was making those packing materials out of, and I'm sorry, I'm trying to say the scientific name for it, but basically out of fungi. And I thought, you know, what a great thing, you know. And so I think that a lot of it is on the part of us consumers. I love Patagonia. I almost said the nickname for it, Patagucci. Yes, Patagonia outdoor products are a little bit expensive, but Patagonia has amazing programs. You know, you get done with your old long john underwear, you take it back and you send it back to them, and then they recycle it into new products. So there are companies that, you know, that are doing this. It's unfortunately just not very cost effective. I've been sharing, as you've seen, Marvin, I've been sharing with the Solid Waste Workgroup a number of different articles, and I've been wondering if I'm being kind of alarmist by doing some of that. But NPR recently had a really great story that they put together that was based on many years of work, that, you know, recycling just has not been working out. You know, we've been all taught, you know, all trained to, you know, to recycle our plastics and put them in the bin, but oftentimes those things just aren't reused properly. So I don't know. I don't think anybody has a solution right at this point.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that we all do is to try to, you know, advocate for those needs as consumers and to put our money where, you know, where it needs to be. Yes, somebody was trying to jump in.
Yeah, this is Jenny Stevenson, and I'll just highlight on that note of that this is really challenging and no one yet really seems to have a solution to it. EPA is currently trying. We have a national recycling strategy that is out and open for public comment. We're looking for your comments and input. The comment period closes on December 4th. So I included that chat box there, and it really gets at many of the things y'all are highlighting of, you know, the challenges of how do we create markets, how do we educate consumers to recycle right, and also how do we improve the infrastructure. So those are the key areas of the strategy. So if you want to take a deeper dive on it and comment, that would be awesome. So the link is in there and we can include it in the strategy. And then one other thing I want to highlight in the chat is we also have an upcoming webinar on kind of the new impacts to international plastic market restrictions and how the export of plastics are really going to be restricted as a Basel waste going forward and how that will impact state and local recycling programs. So if you're interested in that, the link is also available and look for it in the follow-up materials. I will, if you guys still are on your crowdsourcing thing, if we're transitioning a bit, there was a question in the chat asking, how are other tribes in California collecting e-waste, specifically TVs, and what's the paperwork needed to recycle them? It sounds like before the recycler was able to just take the data or take the TVs, but now the recycling company needs additional paperwork before accepting the e-waste. So if any California tribes want to weigh in on that, either in the chat or verbally, that'd be awesome.
Jenny, this is Rob. I'm going to jump in real quick. I'm actually going to text my solid waste manager to ask him to remind me of the name of the company that takes our e-waste from us. But yes, well, we had to start in the past. We just load up the Gaylord bins full of e-waste, including CRTs and things like that. Which some of those things we actually still get paid for. Anything with a screen, we are still receiving money from our hauler. But what we had to do is whenever somebody drops off certain products, and it's usually like anything with a screen, I think it might be things that have lead in them. We have to take down that person's name and contact information, and we actually write it right on the article. And then we keep a log of that, and that's something that was required of us to do. But just in general, you know, we are still taking e-waste from our community. We have a hauler that will come on out and pick it up. They have provided us with documentation and assured us, and I hope that it's true, that they were never involved in any shipping of the waste overseas. It's taken to Los Angeles and dismantled and turned into a feed for different recycling streams. I'll try to find out the name of the company that we use.
Thanks, Rob. This might be a good time for us to shift over to talking about SOPs, Standard Operating Procedures. So it's only kind of a dry topic, but really it could be a pretty helpful thing. And this came up in our transfer station training, the first part that was held over the summer. People got to thinking, it's like, well, how do I sort of minimize chaos in my solid waste operations? How can I get a handle on this, especially when I've got brand new staff, but no extra time to sort of ease them into what we're doing? Would Standard Operating Procedures be helpful? And we thought, well, yeah, in theory, yeah. And we asked around on the phone in the training, like, oh, who has these? Who's got SOPs for their transfer station or their solid waste operations? And people didn't really have any, but people agreed it might be a helpful thing. And I want to get to Rob's point about minimal ones versus maximal ones. But to kind of start on the maximal side, like if in a broad sense, what might a standard operating procedure be? Like how could that be useful? So in doing a little bit of research, what I found on the broad scope was you can find standard operating procedures for a transfer station for the categories that things belong in, identifying the item as to what category it's in, and then where it should be placed in your facility, which for someone who's experienced, probably not a big deal, but for somebody who's new, it's actually pretty tough. And then different sorts of SOPs about how might a site be organized? How do you want to organize something spatially? This goes in this northeast corner, that goes in the southwest corner, this is the grid. You could have an SOP that would help define that and make it helpful for the next person who came in, you know, supposing your transfer station manager is suddenly relieved of his position and you need a new person to come in to help organize. Maybe you've got a plan already in place. Plans for who gets to be an operator and what they get to operate, like who gets to operate the baler, presumably somebody who's read the instructions. So a list of who's, you know, who can operate what pieces of equipment, and then how do they access the instructions? And then by virtue of that fact, who doesn't get to operate these things? Like not everybody should be operating a chipper for sure. Standard operating procedures for record keeping. Like, you know, it's important to figure out, do you have enough supplies ordered? Or, you know, it's very important to be monitoring how much you're storing in the area of anything related to hazardous waste, e-waste, it's important to know how long you've stored something, keep a record of that. So you can have standard operating procedures for that. For training, like what's our training schedule, and you know, who needs to be trained and for what. You could do one for who inspects a site. What do they look for? And then you could do instructions on orderly disposal of waste, like cleaning up an area. You know, first you do this, then you do this. And the standard for being clean is it needs to be broom clean, or whatever your standard for performance is. You could state that. It might make it easier to sort of set forth expectations for solid waste staff. But Rob, you also had an idea about SOPs on kind of a micro level, and maybe you can say more about that.
Yes, and I'm also going to kind of use this as something to kind of also bring up the last bullet point on our agenda in solid waste and GAP. So please, any my EPA colleagues that are on the line, please correct me if I misspeak here. But through our GAP program over the last couple of years, we've been working to develop SOPs. Now, those have mostly been for our administrative procedures, things like how to make a purchase, how to go out and get, do a proper bid, how to book travel, things like that. But we're actually now starting to, I'm starting to work with our solid waste manager at La Jolla, and we're going to be starting to, or not starting to work with him, but I mean, we are starting to work together on this particular task, and that is to develop some SOPs for the transfer station. And that would be, what is the proper procedure for receiving household hazardous waste from a customer? Sometimes you can just simply accept the waste, but you also want to look at that waste. Is it properly labeled? Do we know what it is when it's coming in from the customer? How much is it? So, when you receive that hazardous waste, you want to document what it is. You write on the container, on the package, when it was received, how much it is, and keep that in your log. So we're starting to develop SOPs for that. And that is something that, as far as I understand, from what I know, that is a GAP eligible activity. So you could write into your GAP work plan for the environmental director, environmental manager, or a staff person to work with a solid waste manager to develop standard operating procedures for different aspects of your transfer station operations. And what I was saying earlier about them, and what Deirdre was saying, maximal versus minimal, I kind of like, okay, I think it is great to have a document that brings everything together and everything that you want is there. But also, you know what, when somebody hands me a 58-page document to go through to find something that I need, sometimes I get a little frustrated. It's going to take me a while to go through that. And oftentimes when we develop these plans, they just kind of, get put in a folder on our computers and they're not really normally used. Think of it as, if any of you have ever done any work in a laboratory, if your tribe has a lab for your water quality program, up on the wall of your lab, you probably have an SOP written for how to clean your vials, how to do your pH calibration, things like that. So what we do at La Jolla is, rather than writing full-on manuals for everything, we attack them one piece at a time. Now, probably eventually we'll pull those together, and all together they might make a full-on manual. Maybe we'll do something to actually tie them together. But as I mentioned earlier, like developing an SOP for how to actually operate the baler, or how to perform maintenance on our compactor, or how often do we go out and drive the community and look for illegal dumping activities or things like that. Just little small things that we can kind of keep in a binder. And as Deirdre was saying, I really like these things for continuity of training with staff. The solid waste manager leaves, a new person comes in, and then you have to work to train that person all over again. If you can give them a binder with all of that information, then they can just start reading. And then after they've learned that book learning, then you work with them on site, because we all know that real world learning and book learning are oftentimes different. To me, that just really simplifies the process. And I'm going to throw out a quick shout out to John Flores, our conference host. Remember when he was working with me at La Jolla, and he was our non-point source program manager, before he left his position to go to San Pasqual, where he currently is, he took the time to completely document every single activity that he had done in his non-point source program at La Jolla, and developed a binder. And when we had after he left and we hired the new non-point source program manager, we gave them that binder and said, all right, now this week I want you to focus on reading through this section to read about what are the goals of the program, and then what is some of the past history of the program. And it just made the training of that new person so much easier. So something like that for your solid waste program would be great in my opinion.
Yeah, I just noticed Michelle Gutierrez had a good comment here. She said, yeah, I worked on something similar last quarter, developing SOPs for septic system maintenance / installation / repairs. Michelle, do you want to say anything about that? How long, like, was this like a 2-page SOP or a 6?
Sorry to cut you off.
No, don't, go ahead, tell us.
Yeah, so we actually went ahead and started with the standardized templates. So I think I developed some for construction checklists and installation checklist, maintenance for homeowners checklist, and then the actual contractors maintenance checklist. And from that, I went ahead and developed a management manual, exactly what Rob just described, actually. So yeah, it was probably like a 50-page document. It was pretty lengthy. It took basically the span of the quarter, but I initiated efforts in like the first quarter. So I would say it was like an ongoing year-long project. So yeah, it was definitely funded under GAP, and glad to have got that under the belt. So it was really useful. We benefit from it a lot.
I think it's cool that you started out with checklists. That's a great way of
yeah. It really helped like organize all of the different subsections, you know, from the drain field to the actual tanks to the actual locations. Actually, this segues into a question I wanted to say for the end. I'm currently trying to employ ArcGIS to map these assets, you know, starting with the on-site wastewater treatment systems, eventually doing the community water system, and et cetera. And I'm kind of like having trouble with getting that started. So if anybody has any advice on how to like get out on the field and start, you know, dropping some coordinates and blowing it up on GIS or any kind of Google Earth Pro mapping program, that'd be really cool to hear about.
If anybody can drop that information into the chat, that would sure be helpful for Michelle, maybe for others too. But thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Any other thoughts on SOPs, starting them off?
Well, other people are thinking or other comments might be coming in the chat box. I wanted to ask Mervyn, since I see that he's with us. Mervyn, are we doing an acceptable job, pardon me, at responding to the various issues and action items that have come to the RTOC that you have assigned to us? Deirdre and I have really been trying to work hard on trying to make sure that we react quickly and try to, you know, provide feedback to those requests.
No, I think you guys are doing I think you said acceptable or exceptional.
I think I said acceptable. Are we doing an okay job?
No, you guys are doing a good job. I mean, you guys are you know, I think you guys are allowing yourselves to be pushed, you know, to the limit of what you're able to do. And, you know, clearly you're also expressing where if there's something you can't do, you guys are, you know, looking for other resources that, you know, people can go to. And yeah, I just, you know, focused on this national recycling strategy again, and I'm gonna probably take a look at it. And you know, it's difficult and frustrating as it is, you know, dealing with this administration. We still have to do our part. You know, we got to get on board, and hopefully we can make a difference, even if it's a small difference. You know, get some attention focused on our resources, and knowing that they're limited, and we have to do everything we can to survive, and instead of, you know, just continuing to practice the exploitation of resources, you know, we've got to be more resourceful and, you know, be thinking about, you know, the future generations, and how we get those types of mindsets thinking that way. You know, I don't really want to rely so much on our lawmakers, but, you know, in the end, when you look at the tax code and you take a look at, you know, some of the laws that have been repealed and amended and changed over time, if that's what it takes to, you know, get the mindset focused on, you know, what we all feel is necessary to address solid waste, issues, then that's what we have to do. But you guys are doing a good job, Rob, Deirdre. You guys are, I'm glad that the work group is on a routine function of meeting and trying to get the other work groups to do the same, which I believe they're going to. I think Monday's meeting was a good discussion. At least I think we're all able to see how all of our work groups are starting to function and become more actively involved with the region's efforts.
Thank you, Mervyn. Just following up on what Mervyn was talking about how the deficits of the national recycling strategy. Sally Manning had some interesting thoughts here. Sally, it looks like you feel like this is pretty industry driven. You want to say more about what that looks like to you?
I just heard of it at this meeting, so that's what
okay.
I just pulled off the website just right now, and I saw Mervyn's comment, so it does seem like it may be worth commenting on that thing. And that's my other comment. I was saying that, asking, I think you guys do a good job because you have to serve the needs of individual tribes. We're out here on the ground trying to deal with all this waste, and then also be looking way up at the top of what's happening at the national level and what the trends are. There's a lot of challenges for sure. And that's this particular work group is, it realizes that, and you guys do a good job of at least bringing the stuff up, even if we can't come up with the greatest solutions. Sorry.
Thank you, Sally.
Thank you for that, Sally. I really do appreciate that. And I will just share my opinion because I participate in the America Recycles Network through the Tribal Waste Assistance and Response Steering Committee. And I have been advocating for more focus on the first two R's, source reduction and materials reuse. I do agree that the America's Recycles Network and the approach to it is fairly industry driven. But at the same time, I also do think that EPA really recognizes that they need to have a hand in this as well, and really are trying to push the industry along and push some various initiatives. And I have seen renewed focus from EPA's national offices on materials reuse and source reduction, and I'm really encouraged by that. And that's something that I always make sure goes in the document that we produce every year, the priorities document that we give to the Office of Land and Emergency Management, that we really need to focus on material reduction and source reduction and materials reuse.
Then we've got
Rob,
some, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Cliff. I just wanted to follow up on some things that Mervyn was talking about, because here in Nevada, we don't have a lot of the support to do recycling efforts, or 3R efforts, in fact. And often recycling bills get killed in committee, legislative committee. They don't even make it to the floor for vote. We just had a recent one that was approved for like $70,000, and they threw a party at the state office because they'd only get $70,000. And so this is a good frame of reference, this strategy to incorporate into bills. I walk on eggshells when doing this. I know I can't lobby, but meeting with the Bureau of Sustainable Waste, the tribes can have input on this, and utilizing this framework could help develop write better bills that could pass. Because, yeah, you're right, it is driven by the big companies, the big corporations. But I mean, really think that if people are making a mess, they need to pay to clean it up. And so, yeah, this should help.
I'm really interested here in California with all the wildfires we've been having. I've really been reading a lot of renewed interest and recognition of traditional indigenous practices in, traditional burning practices that, before Europeans came to this country, Native peoples had been, conducting those practices for millennia. And when people came here, they saw this beautiful, basket, this breadbasket of California and other areas in the country. And I'm really hoping that that people are kind of having a renewed recognition of traditional practices by Native peoples in the United States, a lot of it being in California, being focused around fire, that people will also start thinking of, the 7 generations, and that we tend to have too short term of thinking in this country. We're always focused on the big increase to the stock market. And that's not how I'm getting a little bit political here, but I'm just going to say, I personally don't feel that's the way to plan things. And I don't think that's the way the tribes always plan things. You thought about, the generations that would come after you, and you did things in a way that would preserve things for those people. And hopefully we'll have a stronger renewal and resurgence in recognition of those types of strategies.
And Rob, that's a good segue, because we have a question from Debbie Rasmussen, that in Northern California, they've been affected by the wildfires. And so her question is, how can I incorporate gap funding for cleanup efforts? So that kind of both gets at the wildfires and segues into our next topic of gap and solid waste.
I was just wondering, and actually, Rob, you've had experience with fire. I'm not sure if you've had any of it cleanup funded through solid waste, but I also want to recognize Nico Anderson from our GAP office that may be able to speak to that question. But Rob, do you have any, did you utilize GAP funding in cleaning up fire damage, or do you know tribes who have?
Back in 2007, there was a fire that started actually on La Jolla and burned 93% of the reservation. It was called the Pumacha Fire, and it was kind of became part of a much larger complex of fire in Southern California that burned tens of thousands of acres. But 93% of the reservation was burned. And actually, John Flores and I got out, and we actually utilized non-point source funding actually at the time to do a lot of cleanup of some of the solid waste debris and things that were left over from the fires. The EPA emergency response teams were very, very crucial in coming out and helping us manage some of the things that we found. When brush burns off, you see things you don't normally see. We were finding 55-gallon barrels just kind of out in the woods, that were underneath an oak tree somewhere. And when everything burned away, and then we could see those barrels. And we had the EPA hazmat teams out there in full respirators and gear and assessing, the different barrels to find out what things were. And EPA really helped out a lot with removing the hazardous waste from the reservation. I know that Jonathan Rash and Ben Schumann from IHS earlier were talking about open dump cleanups. And, those have to be at least a half acre in size. So IHS may not be the best source of an after fire cleanup. But I'm wondering, Nico or someone else, can you speak a little bit more to utilizing GAP funds for after fire solid waste cleanup?
Yeah, I can. Hi, everybody. Nico here. With GAP, if you guys were in the presentation yesterday, the first answer to everything is always, it depends. In general, we do not, I don't think GAP is the best source of funding for wildfire cleanup. However, there are, as Rob just mentioned, situations like that. Say after a fire, you realize that there are hazardous materials or that there are, chemical spills. Those all can be dealt with to varying degrees, either by EPA or GAP. But debris itself from wildfires cannot be cleaned up under GAP. So it really depends on the exact situation and what is being asked of GAP. We have compiled, we worked with the Air Division and a couple other programs to create a fact sheet essentially of all GAP eligible wildfire related activities. And I included that in the chat. So again, there's some activities as well that are not GAP eligible, and then it directs you to which agency or funding source is available. So that's there. And if, after looking at that, if you still have questions, you can always reach out to me by email or Deirdre, and she can get a hold of me to answer those specific questions.
Ryan, did you want to mention the program that you identified there in the chat box?
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, so I know that we, when I was working for the Santa Rosa Quia tribe, we utilized Bear, and they They helped with cleanup. They helped establish a series of gabions along the creek to as far as addressing potential erosion sources from from the next raining season that will flow through that creek. A lot of technical assistance along as well, just as far as creating plans. Yeah, that's just the sorts I've worked with before. That I, any California tribes affected by any of these wildfires, I would look into that point of contact, whoever that would be.
And Ryan, since I can't see the chat box right now, were you referring to the BEAR team?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the burned area emergency response teams, yeah, I forgot to mention, they were crucial in doing a lot of cleanup at La Jolla, and they actually did do a good bit of solid waste cleanup. And then another bit of solid waste cleanup that we had at La Jolla after the fire were actually local community groups. We had some church groups that came out and offered their assistance to us, and it was great. So if anybody is not familiar with the BEAR teams, the Burned Area Emergency Response, definitely look into those teams and reach out to BIA, because they can help coordinate working with BEAR teams and or also assist with some solid waste cleanup.
If you're on the solid waste work group list, we can easily send you the kinds of articles and training opportunities and links that we talk about in these meetings. So if you want to be added to the solid waste work group email list, please put your name on the chat box and we'll sign you up.
Deirdre, let's take that on as a little bit of a charge to our group. Let's you and I try to work over the next week or two and see what we can do about locating any other resources that might exist out there for tribes after fires.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, we'll try to work on that, folks. And we'll send it out to that email list. So jump on. Yeah. Let us know that you want to be on that email list. We'll send it out.
So let's just go through a few of these slides. We're not going to get through all of them, but these are just general GAP guidance. And now's your chance to jump in and just interrupt, put your question into the chat box about, can this be funded? Can that be funded? Just go ahead and ask, and we'll just take your questions as they come in. So I have to close some things on my screen here so I can see this presentation. Talk a little bit about integrated solid waste management plans, general GAP activities, education outreach, ordinances and enforcement, dump cleanups. Can you go to the next slide? There you go. So we always like to start off with their integrated solid waste management plans. I know we're kind of always harping on that, us at EPA, but it's the roadmap for your tribal solid waste program. And having this integrated solid waste management plan is what's going to allow you to get funding from IHS and from EPA for dump cleanup. It's going to help you get funding for transfer stations. It's going to help you get funding for anything that is sort of involves kind of advanced plannings. It's your comprehensive description of what you're doing, and we recommend that it's updated every 5 years. I think the biggest reason to have a plan is that these things need to be approved by council, and so it means that you, in your solid waste program, you have to have a discussion with your tribal management and your elected personnel, and you have that discussion, you come to an agreement about what are we doing, what do we want to do, and I think that really buys you some power and some freedom to ask for stuff because it's in your plan. So we really emphasize it, and Jenny and I in the solid waste program, and our colleague Robert as well, want to work with you on these and updating them. So I'm going to go to the next slide. So with your integrated waste management plan, the most important thing is your goals and objectives. We want to see you formulate where you want to go, and you don't have to achieve them. It's just, what do you want to do? What do you hope to do? Sit back and think what you want to achieve. And we can help you think through that, and we can give you examples of, some tribes have been really generous about allowing us to use their integrated waste management plans as examples for other tribes. There's some good ones out there. Let us help you by giving you these sample plans and helping you get started, and so you don't have to recreate the wheel.
I'm going to jump in and say that
sure.
Bruce Lee used to say that a goal is not always something that you have to achieve, but it provides something to aim towards.
Yep, definitely. We can go to the next slide, but please interrupt me if there's any question in the chat box. I'll just keep going until someone interrupts me. Here's your leadership there that you want to talk to. Any of the three of us, Arizona, California, and Jenny does Nevada plus some Inyo County area tribes. Next slide. What is fundable under the GAP guidance? We'll talk a little bit about that. Next slide. So, you know, under building capacity, GAP funding related to tribal solid and hazardous waste programs is unique in that the GAP statute provides the EPA with the authority to fund both the development of program capacity as well as program implementation. And that's, you know, the opportunity to fund implementation has been freed up in just recent years through some helpful legislation under an Appropriations Act. Next slide. So what's capacity building under GAP for solid waste? What can you fund? Education and outreach, developing your integrated solid waste management plan, which we are big fans of, developing your staffing plans, developing your SOPs for that matter, Rob. I mean, that's what Nika was just saying. It definitely can be funded. RCRA, other solid waste trainings for environmental staff, your waste characterizations, your waste assessments, you can fund those. You can develop feasibility plans for expanding or building a new solid waste facility or transfer station feasibility plans. We would want to have an integrated waste management plan before we would fund that, but definitely fundable. Developing waste management codes and ordinances, UST laws, and your enforcement plans, all fundable under GAP. What do education and outreach programs look like? It's a key part of all your solid waste programs. You can fund your council meeting presentations, developing environmental curricula, developing flyers and newsletters, having an annual community cleanup. Just specify that we can't haul away things in people's yards for individuals. And it's also focused on outreach, bringing the community together. It would be great to see the data that comes from the community cleanup being used towards a waste stream assessment. Next slide, please. So solid waste implementation, we just talked about capacity building. Now we're sort of shifting over to implementation. So once a tribe has established your program consistent with your capacity indicators, you can fund implementation activities in the order of priority. Number one, first of all, tribal waste management program administration. Second priority is tribal compliance and enforcement. Your third priority is activities to support solid waste management, RCRA activities. Fourth priority is cleanup and closure activities. And just a caveat on these is on the next slide, which is even though EPA has more freedom to fund these activities, unfortunately, the funds to fund them was never increased. So, you know, when we developed a new approach to this, to allow more implementation, it wasn't like additional funds arrived. So you're still kind of competing for the same pot of money to do these things, which means that capacity building is always going to be a higher priority. But nevertheless, implementation is funded. Picking up and hauling solid waste is funded. I think there was a question in the chat box just now that I missed from somebody about whether something can be funded. Can somebody look at that for me since it's not open?
Yeah, it's from South Fork. Are we able to pick up from elders and community that are not able to transport, for example, like transport their tires, discarded appliances, batteries, and take those to the transfer station for them?
I believe that is technically fundable. I mean, I know of tribes that do that. Rob, do you know if you guys fund that under GAP?
We don't fund that under GAP. We do that as part of our regular solid waste program.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just don't pay for it under GAP, but I would think that it would be GAP allowable though.
I would think it would be, yeah.
Yeah, Nika's nodding his head, so yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that description, you know, before the consolidated appropriations would, you know, depending on the description and the situation, not be GAP eligible, but now with those additional flexibilities, it is. So, you know, just make sure, you know, when you're you're discussing it with your project officer that, you know, they're aware of what you're doing, how often you plan to do it, and that's just clear in your work plan. But it is eligible.
Thanks,
my comment here isn't meant to commit EPA in any way, shape, or form, but I'll just say that my experience over the 18 years of working with EPA in Indian country has been that EPA is very flexible, and that if there's an emergency and something needs to get done, even though solid waste cleanup was the 4th bullet point on 4 bullet points, if there is an emergency situation, a wildfire comes through and burns things down, and you have to get out there and do that, I would bet you money, gosh, now you're going to hold me to it, but I would bet that your GAP project officer would allow you to amend your GAP work plan partway through the year to allow you to do some solid waste implementation activities if you experience some type of emergency situation or natural disaster.
Yeah, cleanups do get funded. Maybe not as much as people would want, but they are funded. And there was a good comment in the chat box about getting cooperation from your housing department on solid waste activities. Certainly, HUD funds, housing urban development, if your housing is has any sort of HUD funding that partially supports it, you can rely upon some of that funding to do solid waste activities. So that's a good resource to be thinking about as well.
Yeah, our transfer station, part of the funds that our transfer station receives do come from our HUD allocation, since they pay for solid waste cleanup around HUD homes. So that helps to fund our transfer station.
Maybe we should end with this slide, since we're about 2 minutes till the end here. If you want to go back one slide, this basically, this chart that is up is just what is now fundable under the Consolidated Appropriations Act. So, these things we're talking about: collection, transportation, storage, backhaul, disposal, funding, equipment, facility, vehicle facility operations, repair operation of municipal solid waste supplies and equipment. All these things are fundable under GAP, and apply for them. Speak with your GAP project officer early in the year, as early in the process as possible, and definitely talk to Jenny Stevenson, Robert Seaman, or myself on things that you want to do, solid waste activities that you want to do with your GAP funding. Is there any questions that have popped in, since we're about a minute till the end of our time here?
Well, I can just say as well, this is Nico again, I'm going to add another file in the chat box that has all of the solid waste GAP eligible activities from last year's notification. So it hasn't changed very much. And again, it'll be included in this year's notification, but it has all of the activities, capacity building, implementation, and those allowed under the Consolidated Appropriations Act. So I'll attach that right now for everyone.
Thank you so much, Nico. I think it's 3:35, so we're at the end of our time. We really, really appreciate your spending an hour with us. Really, really appreciate this interaction and the spirit that you bring to this. Please, join our solid waste work group email list. You can come to our meetings, or just get our listings and our training opportunities and so forth. We love interacting with all of you. So thanks for joining us today, and hope to see you at the next solid waste work group meeting.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Nico, you're still on, right?
I am.
There's, we're not able to, this shows you how ignorant I am about this system here, but are we able to save the chat box at all? Is that savable?
I do believe so. I think it's all being saved somewhere. So
Okay.
I would reach out to Melissa or Vanessa to access that. I don't know whether the file that I've attached is going to be accessible later on. So I will also
send that to me. Yeah.
I'll send them to you, and then as well to the organizers, just so in case anybody asks for them, they'll have them as well.
Great, great. Okay, appreciate that. Because yeah, we have a lot of there's a lot of people that want to be added to the list, which is great.
Yeah.
Deirdre,
The chat box is being saved, and we'll make sure you guys have those available.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Melissa, this is Nico real quick. If I added uploaded a document, will that be saved and accessible as well?
The text for it will be, so if we need to pull it from that, we can. It'd be a little bit easier if you just send it though, because we have a lot of them that we have to go through.
Okay, great. I'll send an email with it attached.
Okay, and then you can either send it to Vanessa or to myself. I'll put both of them in the chat box right now.
Okay, great.
Terrific. You guys, panel, thank you so much. It was a pleasure. I
You
wish
did a
we
good
could be.
job.
I wish we could be eating large pretzels with cheese on them right now, but
Good job, Deirdre. Good job, everybody.
thank you.
Thanks.
Good
Yeah,
job.
good
Thank you,
job.
Rob.
Thanks,
Bye,
guys.
everybody.
Bye. Thank you.